Treasury Secretary of the United States. Tomorrow morning, 3 a.m. New York time, 8:30 in London, in the afternoon, Hong Kong. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
People ask me all the time, what is the key to being a really good investor? And I tell them it's to surround yourself with and work with the best investors you can find.
People tell me all
Bloomberg
the
Wealth,
time.
I'm going to take you to meet the greatest investors in the world, the people that I would like to have managing my money.
Focus on the technology, and in particular the financial technology opportunities, because they're going to change the landscape in financial services over the next few years.
From the world of politics
We're not going to be relying upon countries whose
Vær
values we
stille
don't
med det.
share.
to the world of business,
It's all about corporate power at the end.
balance of power, live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters.
We're going to be more clear what the store
How long will it take?
Jeg tjener penger, jeg tjener penger, jeg tjener
5
penger.
p.m. Eastern Time. Join hosts Anne-Marie
Motherfuckers.
It's the one area really of bipartisanship.
Jævla idioter. De som kjøper det er så idioter at de skjønner faen ikke finans.
How close are we going to get to the line before you start to worry?
Alongside Kaylee Langs
The door was open.
Den var dumme, den som kjøper her nå.
That puts the Fed between a rock and a hard place.
as they deliver news.
This is such an important economic issue.
He's no longer trying to run away
Å,
from it.
telefonen min. Takk skal du ha.
Lose some minds.
Insight
Jeg betrente bare ut armene. Hæ? Ja, vi bare trente litt sånn enkelt, liksom. Litt armene våre. Ja, trente noe. Skal trene sånn.
What he did so successfully
Hva?
in 2020, which is run against crazy.
from and about politics' biggest power players.
This was the zombie case, and it's now more than well alive.
That's for sure. With 2 more potentially to come.
I'm willing to have this battle. It is vitally important.
This is the intersection of Washington and Wall Street.
Bringing people directly to the decision makers.
Klubben skal ta gevinst.
Impact your investments and your life.
Balance
Hva
of
gevinst,
power
Jones?
every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Only on Bloomberg. Your global business
Den er her, men du kan ta den.
So
Ytterdråpe. Lukk døra da, for faen. Ja, men du skal lukke en kjøkkendøra da, han skal ikke være løs her.
And you're the person who's saying you can fix this company, and all of the others on the board of directors are saying, well, we're doing pretty well. How do you get received when you start saying, here's what I wanted you to do?
Well, first of all, we don't bring that to the boardroom. Our time is spent with the CEO, the chairman, the CFO, and share our plans with them outside the boardroom. We try
Jeg klarte ikke å stoppe.
an issue in a boardroom.
Jeg klarte ikke å
It's
stoppe.
always best done the day before.
Jeg så den posisjonen, jeg måtte bare ta
outside
den.
that room.
Jeg skjønner ikke hva folk driver med.
We wouldn't be there if they really were
Å,
doing
fy
well.
faens oldemor da.
So it's really hard
Det
for
falt jo
them
noe
to stare
jævlig.
us and tell us we're doing well.
Det var det.
Be presented with the plan.
This is Bloomberg.
From New York City for our viewers worldwide, I'm Lisa Abramowitz in for Jonathan Farrow. 30 minutes away from the start of trading, and we can see markets searching for direction amid a confluence of data showing inflation slows, and yet so does growth. The countdown to the open starts right now.
Faen, Jones, du er meg en fin en. Bom,
Everything
ute.
you need to
Ja!
get for the start of U.S. trading. This is Bloomberg, the Open, with Jonathan
Den var jævla fin. Den var fin. Ja, det var den.
Coming up, fresh economic data strengthening the case for a pause. Secretary Yellen doubling down
I penga, ja. Om jeg er.
as the regional banks take
Jeg har tjent 6 000 nå.
We begin with the big issue nearing the
Jeg har tjent 6 000 på under en time.
Inflation is the big problem.
All of these central banks have shifted to focusing only on concurrent data.
Inflation, that's what matters.
At some point, they need to make the shift because they're waiting for these lags and it doesn't work.
They're now moving towards a pause.
They could pause here.
I do think we're in pause territory.
It's definitely optimistic to think about a rate cut, not so optimistic to think about a rate pause.
They're seeing some cooling in the data. We think rates are restrictive enough. We want to wait for those long and variable legs.
This has been, in reality, a very slow-moving economic cycle.
Dere må ikke glemme at folk er jo gærne her. Oi. Folk er gærne. Jeg tok gevinst nå. Jeg tror det skal falle mye mer.
25 basis points makes at this point.
The devil will be in the details.
Joining us now to discuss is PGIM's Lindsay Rosner and Zach Griffiths of Credit Sites. Lindsay, I want to start with you. You know,
Kan man kjøre en long her også, da, med et par
all
stopp.
of these data points, and today PPI dropping the most since 2021, but jobless claims rising to the highest level since 2021. Is this accelerating the downturn that so many people have been talking about?
I think the big takeaway is the data points we had prior to today. There was nothing that we could see, I think, in PPI today that would change the story. And in fact, that number was bang on. If we were worried about core goods and inflation,
Jeg legger frem Dagsen. Jeg kjenner meg selv. Jeg klarer ikke å stoppe. Jeg må vekk. Ha det, Dagsen. Ha det, Dagsen. Ha det, Dagsen. Ha det. Og så gjør vi klar USA. Vi skal tjene penger på USA. Skal vi ta amerikanerne, og så skal vi vise amerikanerne hvem som verdens beste trader.
No, Lisa, I'd actually take the other side of that. Looking at the CPI data released yesterday, I'm a little bit concerned about the trend in core goods that we thought was very encouraging in Q4. It's really reversed, and you're seeing core services start to come down, but the core goods side of the equation come up. So that's something that we're a little concerned about when it comes to considering how sticky inflation can be with the policy rate where it is in the tight labor market that we have. I think today's PPI data and the jobless claims is encouraging in the softening of the labor market and bringing inflation down at least a little bit, but looking at CPI, we're a bit concerned about that good side of the equation.
Zach, you weren't alone. Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin reacted to just that data, telling the Associated Press, quote, I'm still open to the notion that it is settling. Inflation will follow in relatively short order, but I wouldn't say inflation is still stubbornly high. Lindsay, how would you respond to that, given that you are seeing some sort of disinflation, and yet even Fed officials are saying it's just not comforting?
Yeah, look, they're looking for 2%. We don't see 2% yet, so I think that statement isn't incongruent with what we believe. But I think it's clear that inflation is rolling over. PPI is a leader to CPI. PPI peaked in March. CPI peaked in September. This is all working in the right direction. Maybe the speed of travel isn't as great as the most optimistic would want, but it is definitely moving in the right direction. There have been a ton of hikes put into the system. I think we're definitely warranting a place where we pause. And again, towards the end of the year, I think we cut. I mean, what we're seeing with the volatility that continues in regional banks this morning, there are issues in the market. And I don't think we can just be blindly focused at inflation and its stickiness.
We're going to get to the banks in just a minute, but just in general with this trend of disinflation, but also growth slowing, there's a question of what it means for risk assets. UBS's Mark Heffley is saying investors may be getting ahead of themselves, writing, quote, while inflation is trending in the right direction, we still see potential for disappointment among equity investors on the pace of Fed easing in the remainder of this year. Lindsay, would you be cautious in equities?
I would. As you know, I'm biased. I'm a fixed income person, although I started in convertible bonds, which is a little bit of both. But I think the equity market is missing a lot of what's going on here. I mean, the VIX in high teens just seems to be telling a completely different story than the fixed income market. And I think the fixed income market's got it right. There are definitely some concerns about what this means for corporations going forward. We've seen earnings. They are not as bad, but the number is still negative in terms of earnings quarter over quarter. So that's important to keep in mind, and equities just seems to be completely looking through it.
Zachary, I'm curious your vantage point, especially from the credit side of things, given that a lot of what we're seeing is actually pretty good for credit, that you have a sort of stabilization with respect to inflation, but you still see some growth. How do you push back against some of the pessimism out there in credit land where people are saying, just wait, just wait, just wait? Do you, or do you embrace it and say, yeah, things are going to get ugly?
Det derfor jeg nå trader på X klokkeslett når det mye volum, fordi folk tjukke I huet.
There's a lot of yield out there. We're not expecting a recession this year. We think the Fed's on pause, and if we can get a little bit of stability from the rate side of things, from a monetary policy perspective, if we can get a little bit of clarity on the regional banks, our view is that the concerns there are overblown. We think things are going to be a pretty solid backdrop for credit. I do agree that the equities seem a little bit buoyant and have been less concerned in aggregate with respect to regional banks, some of the volatility around the debt ceiling. But from a credit perspective, we think things look pretty good, and we're staying overweight both high yield and investment grade looking through to the end of the year.
Meanwhile, we are getting a slew of data from the United States, the latest being PPI, which does signal inflation is cooling. Jobless claims also climbing to the highest level since 2021. All of this giving people...
Faen, det ikke shorta stas. Jeg så redd for å shorte på åpning, for da kan det gå rett opp.
Well, Lisa, I think you got to take jobless claims with a little bit of the old two-handed economist thing, because a lot of economists are saying the big jump we saw to 264,000, a 24,000 jump in 1 week, is largely due to seasonal factors. Maybe we'll see if that continues or goes down in coming weeks, but we certainly have had a lot of layoff notices that should start to show up in the data. And the rise is suggesting that maybe we're seeing a weaker labor market, and that is going to feed into the market perception.
Se det droppet der, da. Helvete, ass.
Cutting. PPI does the same thing. It comes in at a very low level on a month-over-month basis, not the negative numbers we saw last month, but at least a low level, and on a year-over-year basis, the headline 2.2.
Burde nesten kjøpe den, vet, for folk er tjukke i huet.
3.2, both of those the lowest, as you mentioned, Lisa, for some time. PPI core
Det her kommer til å tryne her.
3.4%. That shows you that margins are starting to compress as well. And people talking about, are we seeing disinflation? Tom asked me that in surveillance. I said yes. John Riding pushed back. But if you look at these numbers, it does suggest that we are seeing the Fed with success. We're not there yet, but almost all of the inflation indicators are trending down. And Lisa, I'd point to the white line down there. That's the Atlanta Fed. They do a survey of business leaders and what they think prices are going to be. So along with the producer price index, you can see that they think prices are coming down, the business price index from the Atlanta Fed. And that would also feed into this growing narrative that the Fed is at least done.
Mike, wonderful. Thank you so much, as always. Lindsay, I just want to pick up on what you were talking about, and frankly, Zachary is overweight in credit land. Do you agree with that? Do you think that credit can withstand some of the turmoil that you're expecting in stocks?
Nå må jeg holde meg til planen. Nå skal jeg ikke handle før USA åpner. Jeg brøt planen min nå. Jeg shorta. Hold meg til planen. Hold deg til planen. Hold deg til planen. Hold deg til planen. Jeg klarer ikke sitte her og ikke trade. Vi har et problem. Okay, vi finner ting på fin.no.
But still there is some to be had and overlay active management, and that works well. But I think something interesting, Zach's pointing out that he thinks that inflation is actually quite concerning. ... probably means that the Fed would have to be more aggressive. That's actually not where we stand. We think that the Fed is going to actually cut because we think there's a decent likelihood of recession. That actually makes us feel like credit right now, it's about having the right spots, picking the right names, and it isn't just let's just be overweight investment grade, let's be overweight high yield, because the market from an economic perspective is in a good spot. We have some concerns about that economic macro backdrop, and that goes
Stemmer. Nytt produksjonssted. Stemmer det. Ja.
Zachary, your response to the idea of rate cuts by later this year?
We're not calling for rate cuts because we think inflation, while it is coming down, I agree. I think the trends that we're seeing on the government side, like I mentioned, are concerning. But we think economic growth is going to remain positive. And so when you think about the Fed's reaction function in the past, they've been able to respond to volatility or slowing in economic growth.
Nei, det du bestiller, og så går det av seg selv til du stopper opp, så du bare sier opp.
We're still around 5%.
Ja, du må trykke selv, for det er mange tusen kunder.
Looking at a 3-month annualized measure, and so we are a little bit concerned on.
Nei, men du må trykke der som det blir som om du går over, altså ingen leser den mailen din før de leser den. Det kan ta en dag for de leser den. Det kan ta to. Ja. Ja, men hvorfor går du ikke bare inn og trykker av?
And what's going on overseas? Earlier this morning, we got the Bank of England.
Du bare går inn på kontrollpanelen, så trykker du stopp.
A lot of hawkish proclamations from the ECB. Lindsay, from your vantage point, do you see this bifurcation opening up right now between the
Nei, da bare stopper det. Det er veldig enkelt.
And the rest of Europe, in the sense that they're
ja, ikke trenger ikke sende noe ting. Bare tester det, og så hvis du synes det er bra, Beholder det hvis du synes det blir for mye. Ja, da bare trykker du bare stopp, og så stopper det. Ja, veldig enkelt. Ja, så trykker du på stopp, eller pause da. Så kan du styre det som du vil. Gjør det. Bare hyggelig. Ring når du vil. Takk skal du ha. Vet det. Ha det.
If you look at inflation expectations in the US as well, a year out, and this is really amazing, it's happened in pretty much the past 2 months since the beginning of the banking flare, we have seen inflation expectations drop about 100 basis points for the next year. So there is just a very different market dynamic, different economic backdrop, and so when it comes to where we want to invest from a credit perspective, really finding the most opportunities in the US because of everything you mentioned.
Zachary, final word?
Nesten 7000.
We're also more focused in the US. We've had a market perform rating on
Nå tar jeg ikke noen gambling, bare trader sånn som jeg kan. 7000, nesten 7000 på under 2 timer. Tenker jeg skal tjene inn 2 til 5000 etterpå, og da gjør jeg. Det er helt rått å gjøre det her hver dag. Faen, det morsomt også. Faen! Og rått!
Now maybe getting a little more dovish, saying that wage growth has softened somewhat, even though the job market is strong, and then also saying that bank turmoil could be a source of the economy. So this question around that as well. Let's take a look right now at the stocks moving ahead of the opening bell. Here is our own Abigail Dudlow. Abby.
10 milliarder, 20 milliarder, 2 milliarder, 5 milliarder, bam, 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 bam.
7% at this point, or excuse me, 6%, the worst day of the year. This, of course, is their second quarter Disney Plus subscriber miss weighs. They're also talking about the idea that the loss for streaming in this current quarter will be about $100 million wider than expected due to marketing costs. Investors not liking that they wanted something more. Relative to JD.com, those shares are popping higher. CEO analysts say this could be a strong strategy change to help against competition. Microsoft down 0.5%. The UK has continued to freeze that deal with Activision. Yesterday, Microsoft has announced that they are freezing salaries due to uncertainty. Alphabet, on the other hand, up 2.6%. AI advancements have the stock up. New hardware as well at the annual developers conference.
Når vi er positive, så tiltrekker vi tiltrekker oss kjærlighet fra alle mulige steder og kanter. Nå går det rett opp. Akkurat det jeg sa. Folk er gærne. Jeg skal ikke gå den fella deres. Seriøspette? Hva faen heter det for noe? Du har dumpap, og så har du rødstrupe, eller? Det er rødstrupe dette. Rødspette er faen meg fisk. Vi så ikke en rødspette. Da er det faen meg helt rett. Vi så sånn her en.
Looking at the market, sentiment seems to be moving a different direction. That conversation still ahead.
Vi så sånn her en. Rødstrupe. Sånn. Ikke rødspette. Sånn en. Sånn. Faen er rødspette, det er en jævla fucking ørret, det. Jeg har ikke sett her nå. Det er rødspette. Han flyndrer den. Ok, vi så ikke rødspette. Jeg gir meg på den. Drit i det da, en ørret, en flyndre som hva faen er i vann da. Det er det viktigste. Den er i vann.
Hangs opp i dag da?
Hæ?
Hangs opp i dag da?
I dag, jo, jeg startet på nytt. Men jeg tredje av natta, for jeg klarte faen ikke sove. Det var litt dumt.
In big ideas, we show the productivity increases that are
possible
because of artificial intelligence. It's these companies who could be some of the biggest beneficiaries if they harness AI.
Faen, det er enda mer penger der. Jeg dratt den over 7000. Nei, jeg dratt den litt over 7000 kroner.
They look like these viral apps that the
Ser den ble mer nå, av en annen grunn?
The killer app for artificial intelligence is productivity gains, and any company does not harness it. Is probably not going to be one of the big winners out there. Just one other thing on AI. The real winners here are going to
3
be
dager,
those
så dobler han
companies
kontoene.
that have proprietary data and have lots of it, have the best
Nei, jeg skal ikke
domain
ta Max, jeg
expertise,
skal kun
best
3.
AI expertise, the best
Da dobler
pools
han
of high
kontoene.
quality data to
Og så har vi,
basically create new
vi har
businesses.
100 000 til neste uke. Og så har vi... Så klarer å dra igjen 100... Jeg skal prøve å dra en 100 uker. 50-100 uker. Win loss ratio. Ja, 95% wins. Og 95% wins.
Watch Wednesdays on Bloomberg Television.
Jeg har nesten ingen tap. Mot at ikke PC-en henger seg. Og så er det ikke snakk om også, det er liksom ikke, det kommer an på det, ikke sant? Når du skal si, og når du trader, ikke sant? Noen ganger så går jeg ut inn på samme kurs. Sant?
But the financial results are good. The financial results are going to be good, okay, next quarter. You know, they're earning money. They got a very good clientele, very diversified, and they're quite strong. If you look at the detail, the SEC has the enforcement capability to look at what people are doing by name in options, derivatives, short sales. And they should go, if someone's doing anything wrong, people are in collusion, or people going short and then making a tweet, you know, about a bank, they should go after them. And
Det har vært der så det ikke
That
nå,
was
eller?
JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon in an exclusive conversation with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix. Meanwhile, PacWest coming back under pressure, dragging the regionals down with it. The bank revealing deposits dropped nearly 10% last week in just 1 week, fueling the flight. Flight was a Bloomberg report confirmed by the lender, detailing costs with potential investors. In a regulatory filing this morning, the company said, quote, the news headlines increased our customers' fears of the safety of their deposits. For more, Bloomberg Shanali joins us here in New York. Shanali, what's new and what's causing all the concern?
Now listen, a couple of days ago here when we thought about PacWest, it was the fundamentals that weren't a problem. It was the market that was the problem, sentiment around the regional banks. But now we have an instance in which the market is creating fundamental problems, in which you're seeing deposits from the likes of PacWest. Now they have a lot of cash on hand, and from the regulators' perspective as well as other bankers, the idea here is that they have enough on hand to really make it through the storm, even with some deposits flight. But should that number keep getting worse, that's where you have further future concerns. And there's this whole other concern about their cost of funding and how much they borrow from the Fed. Now, Western Alliance, conversely, has said deposits are up after PacWest has reported a drop. So now we are getting to the point where we're parsing the regional banking system. I think you heard Jamie Dimon. He said he has been on the phone constantly for the past week with regional bank CEOs. That shows you we are not yet out of the woods, but we are not at the point here yet of a potential.
Hvis jeg bare kan fokusere på det her nå, så blir det veldig fint. Å faen, en ferdig pergola, det var litt kult da.
Lindsay Rosner and Zach Griffith still with us to discuss just some of those issues. Zach, from your vantage point, how much are you still looking at regional banks as an opportunity point versus the other sort of less optimistic prospect of an area of hurt for a while longer?
So we really see it as an opportunity, and we've been in that camp for a while now. So when we think about the fundamentals underlying these banks, they're very strong. You've had a few banks go under that had very idiosyncratic and clear issues with their customer concentration, with the quality of their deposits, and we've learned a lot about how quickly deposits can move in this technology, in the era of technology that we're in, and so that's certainly a concern. And really, when we think about what we're dealing with now, it's a crisis of confidence. That's something that we've been saying for a while. We think that once we can get some break from the headlines and the focus on this, whether it be
Botox det hos han rikingen med? Ja, men bare når jeg orker det. Jeg gidder ikke sitte der og... Sånn helt seriøst. Helt seriøst. Skal jeg kjøre til Tønsberg i 1,5 time om morgenen for å trade i 2 timer? Nå skal jeg sitte her og runke i 5 timer, og så skal jeg trade i 3 timer, og så skal jeg kjøre i 1,5 time tilbake, bare fordi han har feite biler stående fuckings på kontoret. Jeg gidder ikke det, ass. Det var jævla kult i 2 uker, så så jeg de jævla bilene og tenkte jeg, det er faen ikke mine biler, hva faen skal jeg... Jeg bryr meg ikke om de jævla bilene. Det var kult å få motivasjon og sånn, og så bare tenker jeg, vet du hva? Det her er bare tull. Jeg gidder ikke sitte der bare for å sitte der, ass. Gi meg en bil, da, skal jeg sitte der.
So we don't feel that we need to go to this spot in investment grade, and I think there's so much.
Det er rett og slett bortkastet tid.
To jump into things that are widening. For example, there are a lot of.
Hvis jeg hadde vært i Oslo eller Asker, så ja, liksom. Jeg kjører helt til Tønsberg. Helt til Tønsberg. Og så er ikke jeg sånn veldig sånn der, jeg blir ikke så imponert over bare for å ha mye penger og ha feite biler, liksom. So what? Bryr meg midt i ræva. Skal tjene mine egne penger.
Well, I'd say at least on the T-bill front, I think that no matter what, you're going to get paid back by the U.S. government, so that seems like a decent opportunity to me. I think Lindsay's point that credit selection...
Og så er det sånn at, ok, rikinger vil at jeg skal trade for dem. Ja vel, trade for meg selv da. Why not?
Our top picks, we like Huntington Bank shares from here, and so I do think that her point around credit selection is important, and I would say that broadly even within our overweight recommendations, you're going to have to pick your spots here, but in general, we see the spread widening as an opportunity if you want to take a look at it from an index level perspective.
Lindsay, from your vantage point, would you say it's a crisis? Would you say that this is sort of another shoe to drop on a long list of shoes that are sort of cascading as we hit something that isn't a soft landing?
Det man kan gjøre, hvis du skal ta gambling nå, så kan du faktisk kjøpe her nå. Skal du kjøre en tight stop-loss her nede, så kan du kjøpe. Er du heldig nå, så får du hele oppsiden. Ja, jeg gjør det for moro skyld. Jeg vil ta litt gambling. Jeg lovte at ikke jeg skal gjøre det.
Troubled right now are banks that we were aware of in the apex of this crisis flare, whatever you want to call it. I think the terminology around it is difficult. I don't know that
Skal jeg gjøre det eller ikke gjøre det?
Proper lexicon at this point to determine what to say.
Jeg vet jo hva som skjer.
But what I think is clearly a crisis is the crisis of confidence. That is a real thing. That your average American does not know where to put.
Ja, jeg følger regelen. Helt enig. Jeg gidder ikke gjøre noe.
In the T-bill market, because what's going on with the debt ceiling, that is a crisis. That is real. Whether we call a few banks...
Man blir jo litt sånn her spilleavhengig nesten. For man blir jo sånn... Det er så lettjente penger, ikke sant? Så det blir jo sånn at man har lyst til å gjøre noe hele tiden. Skal du ta den? Da skal jeg ta den. Nei, det skal jeg ikke. Jeg skal holde reglene. Jeg skal faen ikke ta den. Hva var det jeg sa? Opp! Faen, ass! Det er det her som irriterer meg så jævlig. Jeg ser det hele tida. Satan. Jeg må holde meg til regelen.
I think the most important thing in life is the relationship you have with yourself. Once you have a good relationship with yourself, any other relationship is a plus and not a must. And the second advice is to be as true to yourself as you possibly can. And you have to accept and own things you may not like.
Det som er morsomt sånn etter hvert da, er at når du liksom er litt dreven da, så blir det som å lese noter. Du ser på bevegelsene, du vet hvor du skal den, det er litt morsomt.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
Do you foresee a future where JP Morgan could potentially re-enter the Russian market? One day, maybe, but it's very possible that we'll...
Så jeg skal kjøpe den her, vet du. Jeg blir jo helt gærne i hunden.
Countdown to the Open. I'm Lisa Abramowitz in for Jonathan Farrow. Time now for our morning calls. A look at some of the analyst recommendations on Wall Street this morning. First up, Piper Sandler downgrading Mosaic to neutral, pointing to bearish crop data that could hit sentiment on fertilizer stocks. Credit Suisse next, upgrading Alcoa to outperform, naming it as a top pick. And finally, Goldman Sachs downgrading Twilio to neutral. Coming up, we'll get the markets open. This is Bloomberg.
Hva var det jeg sa for noe? Da kom den rett opp dit. Helt etter boka. Og jeg kjøpte ikke, for jeg skal holde meg til regelen. Sånn er det bare. Ja, trader, det er viktig at du holder meg til regelen, altså. For i går så holdt jeg meg ikke til regelen, og da tappte jeg jo alt jeg tjente.
The way a bullwhip makes that cracking noise is because the tip of the whip actually goes about twice the speed of sound. Okay. I think the way they got a date was to impress the females by making loud booms.
People ask me all the time, what is the key to being a really good investor? And I tell them it's to surround yourself with and work with the best investors you can find. On Bloomberg Wealth, I'm going to take you to meet the greatest investors in the world, the people that I would like to have managing my money.
Focus on the technology, and in particular the financial technology opportunities, because they're going to change the landscape in financial services over the next few years.
DOJ or other authorities
could face bigger challenges next.
Was going to keep rate World Cup.
Shorta. Ren gambling på åpning. Hvis jeg var dere, så jeg ventet litt.
Countdown to the Open. I'm Lisa Abramowitz in for Jonathan Farrow. Moments away from the start of trading, losing steam heading into that open. The S&P futures near session lows down almost 0.3%. You could see NASDAQ holding on to a little bit of a gain, but losing it, and the Russell really losing more steam simply because what we have seen is in the bond market, yields lower, and you could see a softer tone more broadly. New York crude lower, almost getting close to that $70 threshold, $71.50.
Short mer.
Yield 3.36%. A little bit of dollar strength. Euro weakness 109.18. One stock to watch at the open is Disney. Shares slipping at its streaming service. Second straight quarter. The C-suite warning of more losses to come. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle back with us for more.
Hey, Lisa. Well, you know, it's interesting because the subscriber miss, that has everything to do with the fact that
Fy faen, er det penger!
Has everything to do with the fact that the company raised prices last December to $11 for a month of streaming. And Bob Iger, the CEO, said that they're planning on raising prices again. But what has the stock down
Fytte helvete, ta gevinst.
Is that while the quarter that they just reported, the second quarter, it was a strong quarter. It was in line with numbers outside of that.
Fy faen!
They narrowed the loss for streaming, but now they're expected to tack on another $100 million in terms of the loss. It's expected to go wider. They're saying it's a blip because of marketing, but
Wow!
put all of this
10 lapper!
that
Boom!
investors clearly not liking the results right now.
Jones, det er meg en fin en!
The last couple of years, this started down
Herregud,
in
Jones!
a big way. This year it's higher, but kind of caught in a range.
Mulig.
To Netflix,
Du
on the
er
other hand,
meg
Netflix
faen meg god
more
en!
than a double over the last year. So Disney investors really want to see them work these issues out. Hope that the return of CEO Bob Iger can maybe do it. Maybe they wanted more fireworks in terms of color commentary. They didn't get it, so they're focused a little bit on some of these blips, according to the company, around streaming.
Worst day since November 2022, if it holds. Abigail, thank you so much. Another earnings story. JD.com shares rising after reporting better than expected results and announcing changes in its C-suite.
De gjorde det bra nå, da. Shorta fra toppen. Fytte helvete.
Move. So this shuffle comes just a year after the outgoing CEO took the job, and it also follows JD.com's slowest pace of growth on record. The Chinese internet retailer actually beat projections. Revenue grew by just 1.4%, so a beat, but not big enough. Remember, this company was putting up double-digit growth numbers just a couple of years ago, of course, before Beijing clamped down on tech and internet companies. So this personnel change, elevating the current CFO to CEO, analysts are saying that this suggests that JD.com is really shifting its focus to profitability, and you can see that shareholders seem to be welcoming that news. ADRs of about 6% at this moment.
Katie Greifeld, thank you so much. And speaking of tech, there is no day that can go by without a discussion about artificial intelligence. Google asserting its dominance in the AI market, unveiling its latest tools and setting shares higher. The CEO is saying the magic words, quote, "We're at an inflection point. We have an opportunity to make AI, ding, 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 even more helpful for people, for businesses, for communities, for everyone." Joining us now is Kaylee Lyons. Kaylee, is this basically just saying the magic word and then shares pop?
Yeah, maybe, Lisa, because you did see the stock gaining 4% yesterday on the day of the developers conference and up again another 3% this morning. If there's anything we have learned in 2023, it's that investors really get excited when AI is mentioned. So Google is doing this rollout of generative large language models in its search engine. I would note, though, that it's doing it quite slowly. This update is only going to exist in Search Labs, which is a new experimental space that users actually have to sign up on a wait list for, so they aren't rolling it out broadly, unlike, for example, Microsoft Bing, which has done so much more quickly. We have to keep in mind, though, what Google stands in theory to lose. Bing has a very, very small slice of the search market, whereas Google is dominant. It is literally a verb, so perhaps there's a little bit of hedging here. All that said, analysts today seem pretty positive on the speed at which Alphabet and Google are doing this. Morgan Stanley saying they're doing so faster than expected. KeyBank saying the event showed the company is moving swiftly. And also separately from that, AI is probably what is getting investors actually really excited. But they also introduced a foldable smartphone, which makes me kind of nostalgic for my flip phone, Lisa.
Kaylee, we'll let you be nostalgic. Thank you so much. Let's go over to one of the more important stories of today, frankly, which is the regionals. The sell-off has resumed in the PacWest shares, with the bank saying that its deposits declined by nearly 10% last week. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Shonali Basak. Shonali, how significant is this sort of decline in such a short period of time?
It's significant because we know that this sector is already treading on ice. PacWest shares concerns. Lisa, when you take a look at it, into this morning, it was trading at about 26% of its book.
Jeg klarer ikke vise dere alt det gjør, for det går så fort.
To the worst performers in the KBW Bank Index, those banks, even the worst performers, are trading at almost 60% or more of its book value. Still under book value, but a significant discount when you look at PacWest, and you see those fears reflected in how their bonds are trading as well. Now, PacWest this morning has been paused due to volatility, but they have been down pretty significantly, almost 29%. Western Alliance, which came out with its own statement on Thursday morning, saying that its deposits are actually up, it is still also down in early trading about 5%. So you can see these fears persisting even for banks that are showing you that they're bringing deposits in or holding deposits stable at this time.
Just can't get the shares to bounce, and you can see that in the KBW index as well. Shonali Basak, thank you so much. JP Morgan's CEO Jamie Dimon laying out how markets move forward from here.
We need to finish the bank crisis. We've had uncertain policy on mergers, this First Horizon deal. I think we have to assume there'll be a little bit more. Yeah. So, whatever the FDIC, the OCC, the Federal Reserve, whatever they need to do to make it better, they should do. Be thoughtful, be very forward-looking, not be surprised constantly, because some of these things have been known about for quite a while.
The first order of affairs was simply getting through the crisis. TPW's Jay Pulaski joining us now. Jay, what do you make of that? Do you think that it is really seeming to be a cascading sequence of events in the regionals, or is it something more benign?
We're in the more benign camp, Lisa. We wrote about this in a piece called Firebreak when SVB first failed, that we actually think this is a net positive in that it really takes the Fed off the table and prevents the Fed from over-tightening and really damaging the real economy. And as long as this is kind of maintained or contained, let's say, in the regional banks, we think that's going to be okay for the overall economy. And we look at things like the impact on credit, for example, because really the concern is that we get into a credit crunch, right? But we look at the spread of high yield over Fed funds, and right now it's about 200 basis points. And when you typically have a systemic crisis or systemic risk, that spread blows out to 400 to 500 basis points. You look at the VIX, for example. The VIX is at 16, showing no signs of concern. You look at the MOVE index for U.S. Treasuries, 125 today, no sign of real concern. So I think the market has correctly assessed that this is an issue for some banks, clearly. And we really think it's an addition to what we call the curtain of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that's really masking some major positives that we see unfolding in the U.S. and around the world.
Okay, there's a lot there to unpack, and I want to start in the idea that the banking
Här har han jävla
takes the
motstånd.
Fed out of the equation. Earlier today, Neil Kashkari of Minneapolis was speaking at an event at Marquette, Michigan, and basically saying inflation is still too high, and this is what a lot of people are saying after yesterday's CPI report. What makes you think, especially if we see the calm ongoing in the banking system, it will be enough to really change an equation for a Fed still trained on inflation running above 5% on a core level?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question, Lisa. And we've been talking about a middle path between high inflation and recession. That's really been our kind of guideline or direction for the past year. And we think we're moving in that direction. We expect the next several months to be very benign inflation prints. The year-over-year comps are very compelling. Inflation a year ago in May and June was roughly 1%. We think it's going to be about 0.4% for May and June of this year. That brings the headline number down to well under 4% by June. We think the market is correctly assessing the Fed is not going to move in June. And we expect the Fed to actually raise its economic growth outlook when it updates its inflation and growth estimates in June. And we think those could be some of the positive catalysts that we're looking for to help the stock market break out and up from what's been a very long, historically very long trading range.
So from the SLOOS to the SEP, the Statement of Economic Projections that we get, I believe on June 14th when the Fed does come out. One thing that you've been positive about, Jay, that you were talking about with respect to these shoots that are revealing themselves has been China. And you've been pushing back against some of the people that have been removing from that nation, saying that's an opportunity. However, we did get data overnight about credit contracting. Are you still as optimistic, or do you think that that trade has basically been played out?
No, that's, again, a good question. China's been a disappointment from a stock market performance, for sure. It had that big run after they removed zero COVID in late 22, and stocks popped significantly, and they've given a lot of that back, even though growth estimates have been revised up considerably, and most people are now at 6% growth for China for 2023. And it really reinforces our view, Lisa, that we're early cycle, not late cycle, in a global economic recovery. And when you look at things that have been dragging down growth, for example, housing or inventory destocking in the U.S., those things are shifting to be growth additive in the second half of the year. And stocks are telling you that, right? When we look at our global multi-asset model, the two best performing positions over the last month have been transports and home builders. So while China's been a disappointment itself, and it's been a disappointment, it's kind of impacted commodities as well. We think globally we're in the early stages of a global economic recovery, not late cycle going into a global recession.
Going forward, what is sort of the threshold that you look for to understand whether the economy is keeping pace with your expectations? And I ask this because the data is so noisy and people are coming up with different stories to define the data points that we get. What's sort of defining for you?
Yeah, no, again, 100% right. I mean, Stan Druckenmiller, one of the greatest investors of the modern age, said it's the most confusing period of his career. So, you know, who are we to argue, right? And I think a lot of that is this curtain of FUD. And the latest iteration of that is the regional bank crisis. We're focused on 4 major global policy changes that we see unfolding on a regular basis. The first is developed market central banks accepting a high nominal growth world by shifting their inflation target from 2%, say, to 3%. That's key. The second is the return of industrial policy to the U.S. and its expansion in Europe. One of the reasons why people are confused, Lisa, is that we haven't had industrial policy like the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of which are starting to funnel into the economy. We haven't had it in the U.S. in 70 years. So no investor today has any real grasp of how that impacts economic growth. The third is the end of yield curve control in Japan. We think that's going to be huge. And we think Japan is exiting structural deflation, going to lead to a big asset allocation shift within Japan. Two stocks. Japan is breaking out. Check out EWJ, just breaking out, new 52-week high. And then the last is China related in the shift to domestic demand away from fixed asset investing and export-driven growth. And that's huge for China.
Jay, we'll dig into some of that in just a minute. Jay Pulaski is sticking with us, and we are going to turn our eyes toward everybody's favorite topic, which is the debt ceiling debate and what's going on with policy, as Jay was talking about. Secretary Yellen out with another warning for lawmakers.
Default is frankly unthinkable. America should never default. It would be tremendously economically and financially damaging.
That conversation coming up next.
Jeg er usikker på om jeg skal gå long eller short. Jeg er short på flere nivåer her, men jeg er usikker på om jeg skal bare gå long. For det henter seg inn over hele linja, og det er veldig rart. Hvis du går så...
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials, find people, analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz.
It was unimaginable that we would see rates move this fast. That was not in the realm of thinking.
Just the timeline of what they knew and when they knew it. Why didn't they do anything about it?
When do we have to see the kill? It's for the Fed to respond to it, and this is really the tension.
Be informed.
You cannot be overly data dependent. You've got to have a view of where you're going.
Be prepared.
I think the earnings season might actually be the positive surprise that people are not expecting.
Be ahead of the game.
Certainly the beginning of something we need to keep an eye on.
And that, I think, is really going to be an interesting takeaway from this moment.
You go all birds on us and you say, turn, turn, turn. Is that what we're doing right now?
Yeah, big question coming into this year for us was, when is that turn going to be?
What a fantastic conversation.
The news you need.
The president's calling on manufacturers to make more in America. It is working, and it's reflected in these jobs numbers.
The analysis you trust.
How do you take this anecdotal data and say, really, just focus on the now, because that is going to tell you where we're going?
What is the measurement of uncertainty that we have in studying the American economy?
Milton Friedman had said there are long and variable lags in the impact of monetary policy. But man, it's a long slog.
The best way to start your day.
People are tuning into this program on a daily basis.
Oh, come on, it makes for good TV.
Let's move on.
Bloomberg Surveillance, weekdays from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
You can see the massive gains for the OG crypto coin.
The breakout we have all perhaps long awaited finally realized. We'll see if it sticks.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people,
There's no question this industry is composed of some bad actors and some good actors.
the transactions,
Volumes have surpassed $24 billion per day.
and the technology.
Stop talking about the technology, start demonstrating the utility.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays.
A default on U.S. obligations would produce an economic and financial catastrophe. Millions of Americans could lose their jobs. Household incomes would be reduced. American businesses would see credit markets deteriorate. And millions of American families that receive government payments would likely be left without the resources that they were promised.
Secretary Yellen doubling down on her grim message for Congress. The debate coming to a head as President Biden taking his appeal on the road and throwing some punches.
Tar ikke gevinst her, tar risiko om folk har skikk i huet og kjøper. Jeg forstår ikke hvorfor de kjøper.
In trouble. This is a manufacturing crisis. There's no question about America's
Fin gevinst her nå, ja.
This coming as former President Donald Trump tells Republicans to hang tight, even if it means default.
I say to the Republicans out there, congressmen, senators, if they don't give you massive cuts, you're going to have to do a default. And I don't believe they're going to do a default because I think the Democrats will absolutely cave because you don't want to have that happen.
Gevinst på toppen.
Joining us from Capitol Hill, Kaylee.
Tok den på toppen der nå,
Well,
nettopp.
Lisa, the former president may be giving some sitting congressional members of Congress cover to take this to the brink or beyond. And I have had conversations in recent days with several Democratic members, including Representative Jerry Connolly, as well as Don Beyer.
Kom igjen da. Hvorfor kjøper folk? Har du opp 8K? Så er det bra sammen med deg. Vips for meg Pepsi Max da, eller?
Concerned in this debt ceiling crisis than they have been in any before. All of that said, though, it doesn't seem like it has led to much of a strategy shift on either side. Both parties still pretty much towing the party line, sticking to the talking points. Democrats are willing to negotiate over spending cuts in the appropriations budget process, whereas House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and his caucus would like to see spending cuts as a condition for raising the debt ceiling, as was done in the bill that they were able to pass several weeks ago. All that said, there does seem to be forward progress. Yesterday, aides from the White House and congressional leaders did meet. They will do so again today to talk about what spending cuts could be on the table. Again, though, it is unclear that they think they are talking about the same thing, whether those spending cuts are part of a debt ceiling package or a budgetary one. But of course, this is trying to lay the groundwork, find some common ground ahead of that meeting taking place tomorrow, again, with the big four, McCarthy, Schumer, McConnell, and Jeffries, taking place at the White House with President Biden, who, of course, hasn't just been sitting by in the Oval Office waiting for that meeting. As you said, Lisa, he took this message on the road into swing territory yesterday, trying to lay on some pressure as the clock is ticking rapidly toward that theoretical June 1st deadline.
Kaylee, thank you so much for that. TVW's Jay Pulaski back with us. Jay, how prepared are you for the U.S. doing a default?
Not very, Lisa. I think it's highly unlikely that it's going to happen, and kind of the threat that it's likely to happen would be, I think, probably one of the last and best buying opportunities for that market break up and out that we expect. And one of the reasons why one, I don't think, has to prepare significantly in terms of rapidly adjusting their portfolios is because bonds are already priced for recession and stocks are positioned for recession. You look at sentiment, you look at cash, you look at number of people overweight equities, whether it's retail or institutional. You know, we are at almost generational lows in terms of investor sentiment. And that's one of the reasons why I think, notwithstanding the headlines on this day after day after day, stocks are perfectly fine. Volatility indices, like we talked about, perfectly fine. And so I think the market is sniffing out an economic recovery.
Han som prater nå prater jo opp markedet da. Jævla klovn.
Hold on a second, Jay.
Alt er bra. Alt bra, markedet bra, ikke noe gærent, alt ser bra ut.
You said that sentiment was already so depressed, and so that's why equities aren't really responding. They're looking toward a recovery. Are you saying that a default is all but priced in, that if we get close to that, there won't be some sort of reaction?
No. If a default actually occurs, then yes, there will be a reaction. It probably would be a buying opportunity.
Jeg var helt I penga til han begynte å prate.
It leads to 3% pullback, a
Klon.
5% pullback in the S&P would be a buying opportunity because let's face it, even if there were to be some sort of technical default, the likelihood of it being resolved imminently, I think, would be very high. In the history of how markets react, particularly today, where so much is quantitatively driven, is that as soon as you have that peak fear, the market and moves forward, and we saw that with COVID, and we've seen that multiple times over whatever the crisis of the day is.
Jeg triplet posisjonen min, så jeg skal ta litt gevinst nå, så ikke jeg blir så grådig.
It's extremely unlikely to happen. If the market weakens in anticipation of that, that's probably your last best buying opportunity for what's going to be a second half that's going to have better growth, higher earnings.
Han helt nedsnødd.
I know that you're bullish. I'm just wondering, is there
anything
that could make you bearish at this point that you could see in the data?
Yeah, absolutely. We watch earnings very carefully. If the earnings estimates were being cut as opposed to
helt borte natta.
Forward corporate guidance, which we just got with the earnings for Q1, if that were to be negative, that would be a real warning sign for us. In fact, it's been very positive, the most positive in a couple of years. So yes, there obviously are things that if we were to see, we'd be worried about and think about repositioning. And we are overweight non-US equities, as you know, and have been for over a year. Europe is breaking out, Japan is breaking out, Mexico is breaking out. There are breakouts happening all around the world. And so the opportunity set, I would agree with you, is not necessarily in the U.S., it's outside the U.S., and that's certainly how we're positioned.
And a lot of people agree with you, and it has been a really good trade. Jay Pulaski, thank you so much for being with us. It's always fun. I always appreciate your insights. Coming up, the market-moving events that you need to be watching. That's next in our Trading Diary. This is Bloomberg.
Hva gevinsten på den shorten jeg nettopp gjorde? Folk jo gærne. De skjønner jo ingenting. Ja. Ja.
Have you thought maybe I should go do something else? I can't do anything better than I'm already doing. I already turned this company around. I've made a lot of money for the investors, the shareholders, and yourself. Are you happy doing this? You're going to do this for the foreseeable future?
I'm going to do it for the foreseeable future. I love what I do, and the reality is we've accomplished a lot. As you described, we've made Blackstone a lot of money. We made our shareholders a lot of money. More importantly, we've grown the business, and we've been a huge engine of opportunity. If you think about all the jobs we've created around the world, all the communities we've made better places, all the ownership groups who we've helped grow their business, and having built a world-class culture, the opportunities
på gevinst på toppen, ute.
And this business, I would still say, is like a coiled spring coming out of COVID particularly. So I feel like we just have more to do. My job's far from done.
Da må du falle, jævla utlendinger, ass. Jævla amerikanere skjønner ingenting. Ikke rart da, når du har liksom folk som liksom har peiling, sitter og prater på CNBC News. Everything's okay, the inflation is under control, it will not default, we have breakouts all over the place, This is going so good. Everything's going so good. You can just invest. You will make money. Blah, 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 blah. Fuck off.
About a tenth of a percent. The S&P currently 17. We can see, 41.12, and we can see that down about 0.6%. Let's take a look at bonds. You can see those yields are also falling lower. Time now to see the trading diary. What you need to be watching through the next week. Fed speak continuing Friday with Daly, Bullard, and Jefferson all on deck. Plus, we'll get the UMich Consumer Sentiment Survey down in D.C. President Biden and congressional leaders resuming debt limit talks. Looking ahead to next week, the Senate Banking Committee holding its hearing on SVB on Tuesday, and Tesla kicking off its annual shareholder meeting. This was Countdown to the Open. This is Bloomberg.
Gevinst på... Jeg glemmer å vise dere, for det går for fort for meg. Faen heller. Det er short der også. Jeg må snu. Sorry, men det går for fort for meg. Ute av den. Jeg klarer ikke switche over hit for å vise dere alt. Sorry.
In Big Ideas, we show the productivity increases that are possible because of artificial intelligence. It's these companies who could be some of the biggest beneficiaries if they harness AI correctly. I think a lot of people are looking for the killer app, like they look like these viral apps that the internet delivered. The killer app for artificial intelligence is productivity gains, and any company does not harness it is probably not going to be one of the big winners out there. And just one other thing on AI. The real winners here are going to be those companies that have proprietary data and have lots of it, have the best domain expertise, best AI expertise, and the best pools of high quality data to basically create new businesses.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
You can see the massive gains for the OG crypto coin.
The breakout we have all perhaps long awaited finally realized. We'll see if it sticks.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people.
There's no question this industry is composed of some bad actors and some good actors.
The transactions.
Volumes have surpassed $24 billion per day.
And the technology.
Stop talking about the technology, start demonstrating the utility.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays.
BSO Now is your online home for weekly Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. See new concerts that go behind the scenes, plus acclaimed archival concerts. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsor, Bank of America.
Pepsi's Number Fever campaign in the Philippines has probably gone down in history as one of the biggest marketing disasters in history, mainly because of a human error.
Kødder du har ikke live news her? Det mulig?
This morning, U.S. troops are amassing on the southern border ahead of tonight's expiration of that COVID-era immigration restriction known as Title 42. We're on the ground with the latest scenes of desperation and confusion as migrants battle rumors and misinformation about what will happen next. Indicted, Republican Congressman George Santos is back in Washington this morning after pleading not guilty to more than a dozen federal charges yesterday.
I'm going to fight my battle. I'm going to deliver. I'm going to take care of clearing my name, and I look forward to doing that.
More on what he's accused of, plus what it all means for his future on Capitol Hill and the Republican Party in Congress. Also this morning, a key vote by FDA advisors on birth control, unanimously recommending a widely used medication be made available without a prescription. We'll take a look at what's next, when we could see a final decision from the FDA, and what it means for the future of contraceptives in America. Plus, high-altitude havoc later in the hour, a health warning from one of our own here at NBC News, Morgan Chesky, will bring you his story of an ordinary hiking trek in Utah that ended in the ICU. So scary when something like that happens and you're not expecting it.
Absolutely. We're so happy he's okay, and so awesome that he's giving some people help, you know, to look out for certain things. So it's great to hear from him.
Good to be with you this morning. We start at the southern border where immigration officials are preparing for the end of Title 42 tonight.
That's right. Migrants are lining up along the northern Mexico border, hoping to cross over into the U.S. once the policy is lifted, but it's not going to be an easy process. NBC News Now anchor Tom Yamas is covering all the latest developments from the border.
Overnight, the border getting fresh reinforcements. Armed U.S. troops building a new layer of barbed wire fencing just steps from Juarez. With the pandemic-era Title 42 set to expire at midnight, the crowds of migrants gathering here are growing. Border officials estimate up to 65,000 migrants may be in northern Mexico waiting to cross.
This places an incredible strain on our personnel, our facilities, and our communities.
On Tuesday, more than 11,000 illegal border crossings in just 24 hours.
We have a dangerous and deadly national security crisis unfolding at our southern border.
Jeg klarer ikke prate med Fredrik.
A catastrophe.
Desperate scenes in El Paso, including children living on the streets. At the border, a confusing scene. Migrants waiting for days to get processed, but access to entry points in some ways opening up.
It's unclear why, but it's probably for safety reasons that a portion of that barbed wire fence, which is on the U.S. side just before the border wall, has been cut out. Now migrants who cross illegally can freely walk up to that border wall in hopes of somehow being processed.
And the journey to the border not getting any easier, even for those just steps from the U.S. Extreme winds kicking up blinding dust, blanketing everything in sand. And those that do make it over will find new rules post-Title 42. In an attempt to monitor the countless families crossing illegally, ICE now announcing they will offer a new alternative to detention, including a GPS monitor for the head of the household and a curfew. But families that don't qualify for asylum will be deported.
You think it's going to be harder to get in? ¿Tú crees que va a ser más difícil para entrar después del jueves?
The end of Title 42 worries the Castro family. For 5 months, they've lived in a shelter, escaping a cartel they say wanted to kidnap their 13-year-old daughter. They registered for an asylum hearing this Saturday using the new CBP app, though they say they had to take a class to learn how to use it.
Do you think you're going to get asylum? ¿Tú crees que te van a dar asilo?
Sí. Thank you to Tom.
Jeg kan tatt gevinst her nå 10 ganger, men jeg gjør ikke det, for jeg venter på en større bevegelse. Derfor så tar jeg ikke gevinst her hele tiden, hvis du lurer på hvorfor ikke jeg tar gevinst.
Now with more on how immigration officials are preparing for the end of Title 42. Good morning. We very much appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Good morning, Savannah.
Homeland
Thank you.
Security officials predicted 10,000 migrants will try to cross into the U.S. per day after Title 42 lifts. But let's just talk about the sheer volume that we're already aware of. We know border crossings have surpassed that with 11,000 migrants apprehended on Tuesday alone. Is the Department of Homeland Security prepared to deal with the influx of migrants we are likely to see in the coming days and already seeing stack up before this has even ended?
Savannah, we've been preparing for over a year and a half for the end of Title 42, and to make sure that we have the resources, the systems, the modern processing in place to be able to adapt and scale as necessary.
Nå henger PC-en min seg, så må jeg slå av. Jeg gikk ikke trade når PC-en henger seg. Jeg har sagt dere før, jeg klarer ikke trade når PC-en henger seg. Nå får jeg ikke lukka posisjonene mine.
That we're expanding lawful pathways to make sure that people are not trying to cross illegally, and that they are not putting their lives in the hands of smugglers. You were just talking about in the package just before this, exploitation that migrants can potentially suffer from cartels that are involved in the smuggling business.
Nå begynner det å like igjen. Nå kan ikke jeg trade. Nå må jeg ut inn igjen. Faen, midt I trading session.
To set up regional processing centers in other countries to make sure that we're also using parole processes that people can have a sponsor here in the United States so that they can fly in legally after being screened and vetted. We're making sure that we're also working with partners to shut down through the Darien with Colombia and Panama, helping moving their resources into place there. And so there's a lot of work to make sure that we're both reducing creating lawful pathways and showing that when Title 8 kicks in, what's going to happen is we're actually going to get to enforce our laws. Title 42 was a band-aid. Impose consequences, such as prosecution for recidivism, such as entry, and so we're sending a strong message. We've also tightened the rules on asylum so that we can make sure that if someone doesn't meet certain conditions, we can have
Nå taper jeg penger når jeg ikke har fått sett på transaksjonen min engang.
And that way we can send a strong message and be able to keep people in lawful pathways instead of working with smugglers.
Yeah, so I understand that screening process is part of something here that we just learned yesterday. NBC News learning that the Biden administration plans to release migrants into the U.S., some migrants, I should say, without court dates and also without a way to track them. It seems that this is a way to alleviate overcrowding. It seems that would lead to confusion and also, of course, be difficult to keep tabs on migrants who cross. What do you say about that? Again, keeping in mind, I understand it's a small, specific group, but does that kind of defeat the purpose of some of the bigger processes we have here? What do you have to say about that?
Look, administrations from both parties for decades have relied on these kinds of parole releases as necessary, and it's only in very limited cases where capacity has been far exceeded.
Ja, nå må jeg logge. Nå får jeg raserianfall.
Are not having to use that in most cases because we do have more processing capacity.
Nå får jeg raserianfall for alt henger seg her. Da klikker det for meg, liksom.
We've deployed, as you noted, 1,500 additional DoD personnel have been deployed in support of our mission at DHS to be able to provide processing support with data entry.
Det har ikke noe å si om jeg tjener penger hvis ikke jeg får lukka posisjonene mine, liksom.
So there is a lot at play. We've deployed another 1,400 federal personnel who are supporting. And in the past year and a half, one of the things that the Secretary has done is, as he listened to and worked with the workforce in Border Patrol, is that we've also created a new Border Patrol processing coordinator position where we've brought on over 1,000 people who are employees who are helping Border Patrol so that they can take off a lot of that processing demand, and Border Patrol can get back on the line and do their law enforcement mission. So
yes, but
we feel that we're very prepared.
If I may just interject there, for those who are part of this select group, is it true though that there would not be a way to track?
Og helt der nede mens jeg drev og rota på PC-en.
They have obligations. Any kind of release that we do, regardless of how it's done, and there's different pathways.
Google Chrome. Hvis ikke det funker, så klikker jeg sånn her.
What happens is that people are in removal proceedings. They have to go to court.
Last ned Google
in
Chrome.
that process, as they await their immigration court proceedings, they have to consistently check in with
Greit.
Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. If they don't check in,
Godta, installer.
we will go and detain
Åpne
them
setup.
and remove them expeditiously. So there are conditions, and again, this is a very limited guidance in case that it's needed.
Nå det like før nedlastningen har fullført, installerer.
And if they do not have a legal basis to stay in the United States, they will be quickly removed.
And may I also ask you about that app that we just heard about a
Nå
moment
har
ago
jeg-
from my colleague Tom Yamas? So part of this new immigration policy, anyone who wants to apply for asylum is required to make an
Accept.
appointment through an app. A couple questions though, if a migrant doesn't have access to a phone, we've also heard reports of glitches, setbacks, people having to take
Da
a
logger
course
meg
to
her.
learn how to
Fuck
use
det
the
der,
app.
liksom. Hvis
Is
dette
it
her er
actually
bedre.
going to work smoothly? We just have a few seconds. I'm so
Google
sorry, but could
Chrome.
you just tell us how you're
working
preparing
incredibly-
to
It's worked
65.
incredibly well in the first 4 months. 83,000 people were able to schedule appointments. The
Login.
glitch is that people want more appointments than there are available. But the reality is that it's working very well, cutting out smugglers, cutting out middlemen by allowing migrants to have a direct way to schedule an appointment. That's very powerful. And we've made it available in multiple languages. We work with shelters and other service providers on the other side of the border to make sure that we do provide information so that people know how to use it. And we're going to continue to do that.
Louis Miranda,
Lagre.
Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Communications for the Department
Okay.
of Homeland Security. We very much appreciate your time on what is, of
Thank you,
course, a
Savannah.
busy week for you all. Thank you for joining us.
As we've mentioned, rumors and misinformation are spreading among migrants making their way north. Some even telling our reporters that they arrived at the border believing it would be
Jeg vet ikke
completely
hvordan posisjonen
open
ligger på
today.
engang.
Coverage continues now with NBC News correspondent Juan Venegas.
As the end of Title 42 looms, the people most impacted seem to be the most in the dark about what it means for them.
Pues lo primero es que dicen que se va a abrir la frontera.
So she's heard that the border is going to open when Title 42 is lifted.
Muy confuso, porque en realidad no, como he dicho, no tengo muy buena claridad al respecto de este tema.
One migrant shaking his head in confusion when asked if he knew what Title 42 is.
No have idea.
Now, the U.S. government trying to step in. Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas announcing a new campaign in Central and South America to combat misinformation.
Smugglers have long been hard at work spreading false information that the border will be open after May 11th. It will not be. They are lying.
Desperate migrants hopeful they will get into the U.S. and be allowed to stay, but also uncertain about what to expect.
There are many people who arrive here who just don't know what it means to be waiting for Border Patrol to process them.
While a lot of rumors spread on social media,
We provide Know Your Rights.
immigration attorney Nicole Ramos runs an organization using those popular platforms to educate migrants on policy.
Rumores de CBP-1. Hay muchos rumores divulgados en la zona fronteriza.
In order to be considered to enter the U.S. to begin the asylum process, asylum seekers need to make an appointment.
The Biden administration rolling out a regulation that could disqualify those who cross into the U.S. illegally from claiming asylum.
Deilig! Nå tappte jeg penger fordi jeg måtte laste ned en fuckings drittside. Jævla bra.
Seeking protection there first.
Bra jobba,
Their
Jones.
journey from Central and South America.
If you're able to schedule an appointment through the CBP-1 app, you can actually get an exception and still be able to apply for asylum. The problem here is
Dere skjønner at jeg blir fucka av dere vil holde på her. Jeg burde bare logge av nå. For dette her, jeg bruker mer tid på å finne fram her nå enn å se. Å, fy faen, nå klikker det i vater for meg. Dette her, nå gir jeg meg 5 minutter, så logger jeg. Dette gidder jeg ikke. Kan ikke sitte og godta alle for svarte faen.
Ja, det er enklere å si ja når det er lave priser. Obsbygg. Lav pris til alle.
Industrial city that's kind of fallen on hard times in the last few decades. It was severely bombed in the war, so the center of the city is quite stark. Some of the few high
Ja,
points
men nå driver vi også
it's Soccer
prøvde å bytte Demens er tredje, det er helt noob.
My name is Ike Henning. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News, and I'm a great fan of Borussia Dortmund. Dortmund fans are super loyal. On all match days, the entire city is in black and yellow. It's like a religion.
I think more than most German cities, soccer does play a very large
Hva faen skal du til Lirtoppen? Du går buss til Lirtoppen. Du og?
In October of 2000, BVB became the first team in the Bundesliga to actually go public. Salaries for...
Sånn deilig, Jones. Taper penger mens han skal skifte. Han får ikke tatt gevinst for det nettet mitt.
By going public, they would be able to compete better with big teams like...
Jeg lurer på jeg lukker alt. Jeg har tjent masse penger i dag, og så logger jeg meg på morgenen, for jeg er så ræva med at dette gidder jeg ikke. Jeg gidder ikke. Bruker kvarter for å kunne lukke posisjonene mine, som var i helvetes i pluss.
So on April 11th, 2017,
Irriterer møkka av meg.
The team was staying in a hotel on the outskirts of Dortmund.
Match days are always special in Dortmund. Everyone is looking forward to it. The team always meets in the same hotel ahead of matches.
They stayed in this hotel in order to have a kind of neutral space before games so that they could concentrate, be sort of isolated from distractions, things like that.
Pust rolig.
Was pretty
Pust
optimistic.
rolig.
They had a chance to go really far, maybe into the finals. I was in the office and getting ready for match day. I was going to meet with a friend, a fellow Dortmund supporter, in a pub. As always, the fans are very excited about matches.
On that day, they were heading to play in the quarterfinal against AS Monaco at Signal Iduna Stadium, which is in the center of Dortmund. Shortly before 7 p.m., the players of the team boarded their official team bus.
Ped snakker da.
When the bus took off the
Nå tar jeg gevinst. Nå er jeg monstergevinst.
There were three detonations, 3 bombs that exploded and hit the bus of Dortmund.
3 explosions occurred close to
Masse
the Borussia
gevinst.
Dortmund team bus. The B team bus had
Ta
just
gevinst.
left the hotel.
Da er den ute.
The explosions destroyed
Ta
2 windows in the rear part of the bus.
Da er den
People
ute.
screamed, people jumped
Da var det faen meg
to the
enda godt da.
ground.
The fellow Dortmund fan I was supposed to watch the match with, he called me and said, turn on the TV, there was an attack of the Dortmund bus, and I thought he was like, that was impossible.
Some of the players screamed at the driver to keep driving as fast as possible because they were worried that
Ja, mye bedre på Chrome. Mye bedre. Jævla bra. Mye bedre. Mye bedre. Glipper ikke det hele tatt. Jævla bra.
unbeknownst to the team members, the actual mastermind behind the attack was, as they were disembarking the bus, was actually eating steak and sweet potatoes at the hotel.
Funka mye bedre. Mye bedre. Lagger ikke det hele tatt. Tok gevinst fort. Lagga ikke det hele tatt.
Attacks by Islamic terrorists in Germany and Europe. There was widespread suspicion in the media that this was another Islamic terror attack. 3 letters were found at the site of the bombing that took credit for the attack on behalf of Islamic State. There were, however,
Tusen hjertelig. Det faen meg var bra da.
Particular narrative
would actually be a surprise if ISIS were actually part
Gay.
of this attack. Possibly could be employed by other groups like the far right wing.
If ISIS was gay.
The letters had some strange qualities. They were written in a strange German that used big, sophisticated words, but had basic grammar mistakes, as if someone was native German speaker but pretending to be a foreign person.
Federal investigators have detained 1 man suspected of links to Islamist terrorism, one of 2 suspects whose apartments were raided this morning.
Kan få dropp ned her, litt risky. Doble shortmen her nede, selv om det er galskap. Veldig støttenivå her nede. Men hvis det skreller ned nå, så faller det noe helt jævlig.
The team shares. He emailed the lawyers of BVB, who then forwarded that email on to investigators. The email stated that someone had bought 60,000 BVB put options, a wager that
Så jeg doblet shorten her nede. Anbefaler ingen å gjøre det.
Why would someone buy that ahead of a match and then 3 bombs go off? Something isn't right here.
For the person to make money off of that, it required the stock to go down quite a bit in a fairly short period of time. And it wouldn't just be the team losing a match, it would require something much bigger than that. There was another big red flag about this purchase, which is the fact that it had actually been made, number one, on the day of the bombing, but also from an IP address that had been traced to the
Tok emot, shorter på nytt.
When 3 explosions targeted the bus carrying the Borussia Dortmund footballers on April the 11th, written notes left at the scene claimed the attack was the work of ISIL. The truth, as is now alleged, is remarkable.
On April 21st, the police arrested a man in a southern German city called Tübingen. He was on his way to work, and his name was Sergei Benegold. He seemed like an unlikely suspect because he had no known connections to the Islamic terror world. He didn't seem like a far-right extremist. He didn't seem like a left-wing extremist either. He seemed to be a completely unremarkable young man.
A 28-year-old German-Russian man named only as Sergei W. stayed in the same hotel as the players on the night before the bombing. He specifically requested an upper room overlooking the bushes where the explosive devices were hidden.
The media dissected why he would do that, what was his past.
He had been inspired by the 2015 terror attack in Paris. And he noticed that in the aftermath of the attack, the stocks of French companies went down. And he believed that if an attack took place that was directed at a specific company, that the decrease in stock price for that company would be even more dramatic.
It never occurred to anyone that someone would do that out of greed.
We now know that the suspect bought 3 different derivatives on the Borussia Dortmund shares. With all these derivatives, he bet on falling shares. The suspect bought the majority of these financial products on the 11th of April, the day of the attack.
If the plot had been completed
Se Daxen tryner da.
And the stock had reached a value of 0, Benegold would have made up to 570,000 euros, or the equivalent of about $608,000. Ultimately, the plan completely backfired.
The attacker, Sergei Benegold, didn't make any money. In fact, he lost money.
In court, he would be extremely quiet. He usually kept his hands clasped together. One of the lawyers actually commented that he had never seen a defendant act so calmly. Benegold had served some time in the German military. From that information and from online research, he was able to figure out how to assemble remote detonated bombs that would do what he hoped to do. There were a few days of extremely emotional testimony, including the soccer players who described doubting whether or not they could ever play another game again.
It brought everything back up, and it didn't quite help them to kind of process what was going on.
Throughout it all, he sat there completely silent. The big mystery that was swirling around the trial was the question of why he may have simply done it because he wanted to impress a woman. Rebecca is a young woman who has a very troubled home life. She ultimately sees her relationship with Benegold as an opportunity to...
Er det noen som vet hva Fed sier, eller som hører på talen?
Benegold is a Russian immigrant to Germany. He speaks with an accent. He has anxiety in large groups of Germans. She begins to resent the fact that he has these fears and feels a little bit trapped. Rebecca attempts to dump him on multiple occasions, and he threatens to commit suicide if she leaves him. Benegold apparently told Rebecca that she would soon be seeing a surprise. After being dumped via text message, he apparently began planning for this attack in earnest. Benegold was charged with 28 counts of attempted murder, which carried a maximum sentence in Germany of life in prison. He claimed that he had nothing to do with the attack, but as time went on, he admitted that he had actually been the person who had built the explosives and had set them off. But he claimed that he didn't want to actually kill anybody. Ultimately, Vayner Gold didn't receive the harshest possible sentence. He was given 14 years in prison, but
Kan hende vi ser det samme bevegelsen som i går, trader, at vi stenger på det high. Da går jeg longer nå et øyeblikk. At dette her er bunnen.
Ion. Electrified. Hanguk tire.
I Propfinder så får du 3D-kart, prosjektinformasjon og temakart, alt på ett sted. Det er et verktøy som hjelper deg til å finne innsikt og kunnskap i forbindelse med eiendomsutvikling.
Han choppa her sin åpning, den har ikke gått ned.
Eiendomsinformasjon. Vi har blant annet det med 3D-modeller i tjenesten, hvor du har muligheten til å se på sol-skygge. Du har muligheten til å legge til og fjerne bygg. Tjenesten forenkler fra det gamle regnearket til nåtidens moderne måte å bygge tjenester på. Tjenesten er lett å navigere i, det er lett å finne både prosjekter og eiendommer, og man har også muligheten til å lagre og sende videre prosjekter til andre kunder og kollegaer. For de som anvender dette, så betyr det at de får enkel eiendomsinformasjon, de får eierinformasjon, de får hjemmelsinformasjon, og de får veldig mye på ett sted. Dette er løsninger for deg som ønsker å redusere risikoen i tidligfasen i prosjektet ditt.
Skal jeg gå long, eller skal jeg bare holde? Nå er jeg jævla usikker.
However, one thing is certain. We haven't found them all.
There are thousands out there.
Burde falle mye mer, og det gjør ikke det, altså. Det tar imot her liksom, hele tida.
There are a lot of asteroids in our solar system. They number in the billions.
Scientists all over the world are working toward detecting and deflecting the most catastrophic of natural disasters.
The race is on to find as many of these objects as we can.
We have a way of calculating whether or not an asteroid is potentially dangerous or not.
I mean, I think it's something worth investing in. It's our existence at stake, right?
Amy, let's get this one out of the way. It's probably the question you get asked the most, but how scared should we be?
Asteroids and comets are a natural hazard that's out there, like a lot of.
Jeg tør ikke shorte mer, jeg sitter rolig. Jeg er veldig usikker på om jeg skal bare gå long her.
The most important thing that we need to know about asteroids is, when the next impact is going to happen and how bad it will be. What we know is that an object that's about, say, a kilometer across is capable of causing very, very wide devastation across the planet, really, truly global devastation. The object that wiped out the dinosaurs was somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 kilometers across, so even bigger than that. At a kilometer, it's still going to be very bad and will have global effects. For objects that are capable of causing what I would call sort of regional damage,
Romeo,
kind of a large major
passer du på bikkja, eller?
A city and its surrounding environments, sort of around 100-ish meters. It depends on the details of the composition and so forth.
By the 1980s, NASA was cataloguing near-Earth objects. In 1994, stargazers watched as comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 hit Jupiter. The resulting zone of chaos was estimated to be as large as the Earth, and the event became a turning point in the search for asteroids and comets in our solar system. In 1998, Congress tasked NASA with finding 90% of asteroids and comets 1 kilometer wide or larger. Soon after, Hollywood blockbusters Armageddon and Deep Impact brought attention and fear to the masses.
The great news is that the vast majority, more than 90% of all the really large 1 kilometer near-Earth objects have been found. The challenge now is working down to these smaller sizes that are still quite capable of causing a lot of damage, but they're just harder to spot because they're fainter, they're smaller.
Can you give us a sense of how many are out there in our solar system?
We know that there are a lot of asteroids in our solar system. They number in the billions. Most of them, however, are.
Hva er det vi ser på? Ser vi på astrologi når vi trader? Hva er greia med det?
This is a region of space where most of the asteroids in the inner part of our solar system live, and they stay there for many billions.
Nå har vi penger igjen. Men det bør faen meg... Det bør falle mye mer. Jeg er ikke helt overbevist, ass. Det skal falle mye mer. Det faller faen ikke. Folk er gærne. Det skal falle mye mer.
You know, I'm exceptionally skilled at getting Citadel agents to talk.
But it would simply say it's going to take a while to fix the underlying problem. And in fact, in the case of SVB and the San Francisco Fed, they agreed that it was going to take a while to fix the problem. Unfortunately, the problem got large enough where the bank failed before the problem could get resolved.
Let me just raise a question with you that I really need to understand further. The balance sheet. Does the balance sheet reflect liquidity, and do they have the responsibility to report the securities that they have and the value and whether the value has changed? And someone said to me for the regionals, it's just a footnote. Can you explain that?
A bank of the size of both SVB and Signature, they are required to mark securities that are considered available for sale, mark those to the market value. Any changes to that value is accounted through it's an account called accumulated other comprehensive income is where it would be recorded. So it is being recorded. If the securities are held not for sale, then those securities are not marked to the market.
Have there been recommendations about how the balance sheet should reflect the value of those securities?
I'm not aware.
Nå tjener jeg ordentlig penger. Og så er jeg så jævlig på dass.
Identify a handful of asteroids which weren't considered potentially hazardous, that when we went and integrated them forward in time, they came quite close to Earth.
We find a handful which were not detected before or not considered being dangerous before, and we think they are potentially dangerous.
It's very hard to simulate kind of going forward in time an asteroid that's going to hit Earth, because the Earth is really small. And space is really big, and then you have to have very exact parameters to shoot an asteroid that goes and hits exactly Earth. And then Simon had the ingenious idea of not even trying to do that and just launching the asteroids from Earth's surface and integrating backwards in time.
It's very hard to make it hit, so you need a lot of calculations which all end up in nothing. And the idea was then, like, well, let's not do that. This is basically what NASA is doing. NASA is taking an asteroid, making multiple copies of them, shooting them all forwards in time, calculating their orbits, and then see what fraction sort of gets close to Earth. Not even hitting Earth, but getting close to Earth. And then they call it a potential impactor. So you calculate the solar system forwards in time for, let's say, 1,000 years. And then you launch asteroids from the surface as if they, if you go forwards in time, would fall on the surface. You calculate them backwards to today, and then you get your orbital parameters of today's asteroids, which you know will land on the planet. And those you can use as known impactors and compare with all the other asteroids in the solar system.
Can simulations and AI, can those things fill in the gaps where perhaps telescopes and other imaging tools can't?
Absolutely. Since the observations get more complex, the physics gets more complex. And if the physics get more complex, the mathematics becomes more complex. And at some point, you can't solve your problems analytically anymore. And then this is where the computer comes in. Now we have this trained neural network. We have a way of calculating in a fraction of a second whether or not an asteroid is potentially dangerous or not, and therefore deserves more attention or more time to spend on for really finding out if it is dangerous.
When it comes to hunting asteroids, time is critical.
What we can do about a potentially hazardous object depends a great deal on what we know about it and how much time we have before the encounter. We'd really like to find them when they're decades away, because the more time you have, the more options you have, and the less energy it takes to move an object aside.
It also means we might not have to resort to launching a nuclear warhead at an asteroid. Until recently, pretty much our only choice.
That's an option of last resort, in my opinion, yes. We have lots of options available. You can just simply bump into the object and just nudge it out of the way. That's one possibility, and that's kind of, in a way, sort of the simplest thing to think about, just nudging it off its path a little bit with, a massive object, a spacecraft, let's say. It's just kind of like bowling, if you will. If you have a long time or a long stretch of runway in the lane, just a very small twist on the bowling ball will make a big change in where it ultimately ends up. Another option would be something where you take a very big, massive spacecraft and you park it next to the object and you use the force of gravity as a towing rig. That takes longer though, and you need to be able to send a pretty massive spacecraft, and it obviously depends a lot on how big the asteroid is. Other options start to get more and more complicated, and they range from painting one side of the object a white color and painting the other side dark and then letting the pressure of light sort of perturb its orbit.
In a departure from the lab and computer simulations, NASA has real plans to rehearse kinetic impact deflection. In 2021, the agency will launch DART, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test mission, which will intercept a 160-meter asteroid in 2022. Better to practice now before we have to deal with an actual threat.
Viktig. Lunge.
In the meantime, discovering asteroids is our best bet. Thousands of scientists and amateur astronomers around the world make up an informal network that survey the heavens. But that may not be enough. NASA wants more resources to map our solar system and better technology.
We need to ramp up our network of sensors, and also we need to just continue to strengthen our network of international observers so that we can get follow-up, because we find these objects when they're distributed all over the night sky.
Once we get more observations, we get better data, we can make better predictions.
If you look at the big impactors we have had in the last, let's say, 20 years, or maybe 30 years, 50 years, most of them we haven't seen coming. So the real danger, I think, comes from the objects we don't know about, and not from the objects we do know about.
This particular natural disaster, like a lot of natural disasters and like climate change, is a problem of the global commons. So the thing that we risk collectively is that it sort of then becomes nobody's problem, and nobody takes ownership over it. The asteroids are all over the sky. They just truly cross boundaries and borders with a second's notice.
I kind of imagine in the future, maybe lots of small satellites around the Earth that are always going and looking outward. I mean, I think it's something worth investing in.
Når vi jobbet på Bagatell, tok du ut biffen da, og lot den ligge på benken i timesvis.
Du kjenner meg ganske godt. Tror du jeg husker noe som helst fra Bagatell? Vi skal knuse en myte. Må man til...
Halla. Hva går? Nå har jeg dratt inn 7000 liter.
The pandemic has affected everyone in different ways. Some pass the time by baking.
Nei, mer 10 000.
Do I need to say more? Some chose to binge watch Netflix. It's your game. Or maybe you started a garden oasis in your backyard.
Hva var det du sa for noe? Hørte ikke en dritt også.
Jeg sa ting går litt til faen her på jobben, så jeg er inne på jobb. Så jeg må komme tilbake til deg senere. Eventuelt så får jeg fri i morgen.
Det går fint det. Jeg sitter og gir gass, jeg.
Ja, er det noe du trenger?
Nope. Jeg trenger bare å ha en PC som funker, og nå har vi byttet til sånn ny sånn der... Nå bruker jeg Chrome, så nå henger det seg ikke.
Nydelig. Har du hørt noe fra Nordea?
Jepp, jeg måtte fylle ut enda en, for jeg måtte først fylle ut at jeg visste risikoen med Funded-konto. Det gjorde jeg. Og så måtte jeg fylle ut om det er på vegne av meg eller andre. Det måtte jeg fylle ut i natt.
Så nå er det går, ja?
Jeg vet ikke, jeg må få svar dem snart da. Jeg sendte det i dag i natt.
Ja, ok. Ja, på Salzburg der for annet enn hva jeg er i vakt neste uke, så er jeg fri helt til fredag natt, så da skulle jeg gjøre plass.
Så tredje da?
Ja, som faen, da setter jeg meg hele dagen.
Ja, da tjener du penger, som på ordentlig. Tjener penger hver dag.
Ja, det er helt nydelig.
Konge, greit det.
Ja, men jeg må slekke. Vi høres. Lykke til.
Ha det.
Is no longer being held in secret offices in New York and Boston of privileged people talking to other privileged people. It's right out in the open. It's on Twitter, it's on Reddit.
From brokerage apps to Discord channels and subreddits to TikTok finfluencers. One of the last holdouts in the world of disruption, finance is next in line.
Investing should be as ubiquitous as shopping online.
That's Vlad Tenev, the CEO of Robinhood, the online brokerage app, talking about how he wants his app to disrupt the world of stock trading like Amazon disrupted the world of home shopping.
And I think that speaks to exactly the mission that a platform like Robinhood has, which is to democratize investing.
Robinhood was started in 2013 by Vlad Tenev and Baiju Bhatt in, where else, Silicon Valley, as an alternative to the big brokerages, but with one big difference.
As they were building this social network around finances for people, they realized that there was a gap in the market and that free trading could become something that they could bring to the markets, they could disrupt the industry.
While no-fee trading is industry standard today, it was unheard of when it was first introduced.
The online brokerage industry was really innovative when they came on the scene 10, 15 years ago, but they kind of stopped innovating where you haven't seen those commissions come down beyond $5 or $6 or $7. Robinhood think that by offering zero commission that they're going to push people onto this platform.
And on top of no-fee trading, the customers Robinhood was courting have been long overlooked in the world of finance.
So the typical customer of a Charles Schwab, for example, is putting a lot more money in that brokerage account than the typical customer at Robinhood. Even today, with all of its popularity, the median account size is about $240.
The Fidelities and the Schwabs and the E-Trades of the world, they look down their nose at those kind of accounts. I don't want a $1,000 account. They're just a headache. I want a $100,000 account.
And this is key here, right? Because the thing about Robinhood that's different than every other single brokerage platform
Nå henger den dritten seg her nå da.
is to use.
Nå henger denne seg også. Da var det ikke Chrome da.
The Robinhood app really has in mind a user who might be coming at this absolutely.
Nå logger jeg, ass.
The fonts are very well sized, the shapes, the colors, all of that is something that the founders of Robinhood paid really close attention to.
And by creating an interface that catered to a newer investor, they were able to gather a pretty healthy group of customers. And by 2019, they had about 10 million customers.
Those 10 million customers were a huge success story for Robinhood, but no one could have predicted its explosion after the arrival of COVID-19.
Remain indoors to the greatest extent, and 100% of the non-essential workforce must stay home.
What we saw when the pandemic hit was the growth of Robinhood users absolutely turbocharged. And oddly, you saw this surge in interest in stock trading. Then they saw the absolute surge in 2020 in customer growth. And now, by many accounts, they have more than 20 million customers, which is pretty extraordinary. So the next step for them is to figure out how to monetize those users and how, even with their small account sizes, to get them to grow with the company and, as it releases more products, come along with them.
Robinhood would become one of the COVID economy's breakout successes. Robinhood traders, as they're called, became the shorthand explanation for the frenzy of often speculative retail investing after the pandemic lockdowns.
Kids wake up in the morning, they go on Robinhood. They're, in the shower, they check Robinhood. Kids are learning how the stock market works at 18 while they're at school, checking their phones in between classes because notifications pop up telling them what their stocks are doing that day.
With these new tools, millennials and Gen Z are investing in the market in ways their parents could have never even dreamt of.
That is sort of key when we talk about the divide between older and younger generations, is that the younger generation was exposed to so much more information.
Nå det noen som har sagt noe som ikke vi har fått med oss.
To do what they want in the market.
Retrace helt opp uten grunn.
Had the technology or the cost structure that you could play the markets like you can today. So you were stuck with giving your money to a professional investor and paying them a fee to do it.
When I speak to young kids, they tell me, I'm making mistakes, I'm losing money. I'm not a perfect investor, but I'm 18, and by the time I'm 30, which will be, 10 years from now, I'm gonna have interacted with the markets for a decade. And so it's a learning experience more so than anything else.
And you can look at it and you can say, wow, that's risk-taking, that's dumb, but if you could possibly shave 10, 20 years off your working life versus adding 5 years, I don't think you can fault people for that.
But Robinhood is only part of the puzzle. Sure, you can trade on it, but without research, information, and data, you're just blindly throwing darts at different stocks and hoping to strike rich.
Wall Street forever has always run on what we now call needs. People telling rumors to each other have been around for 100 years.
On Wall Street, information
det mulig at ingen som sitter over chatten?
Historically, either you had it or you didn't. And the people who had it had a huge advantage.
In the past, those narratives
Kødder du? Sitter vi 37 mennesker, ingen vet at Fed prater?
Over the phone. In fact, when I broke into this business in the 80s, a lot of people used to complain that they weren't on the call list to get those ideas.
Social media changed all of that.
Fast forward to 2021, that's being done on the internet now. And that's being done on Discord and Twitter and StockTwits and Reddit. And the impact is very similar, but orders and orders of magnitude larger.
As social media has played a bigger part in our lives, it's also played a bigger and kind of more important role in how people find investing ideas online and on these platforms.
How do those ideas spread? On TikTok. Yes, that TikTok.
Så ikke trade når Fed prater. Helt idioti.
People aren't just going to it for sea shanty videos.
The personal finance hashtag on TikTok has garnered 3.5 billion views from its 1 billion monthly active users. By comparison, videos found under the cooking and health tips hashtag have 2.6 and 2.1 billion views respectively.
The trajectory of Robinhood and TikTok were literally on par.
What happened in the stock market this week? So the word of the week is expectations.
Absolutely essential that you guys understand the risks of shorting.
And Kayla Kilbride and Kyla Scanlon are two of those financial influencer TikTokers, also known as finfluencers.
I think people still care about fashion, they care about culture, but it's also like there's this big behemoth thing called the stock market that we really don't know a whole lot about, and it's gatekept behind the industry. And so people want to unpack that. And so my audience is a lot of them are younger investors who are looking to hone their skills.
Tech and right up.
Kyla and Kayla are two of the more, let's say, professional TikTok influencers.
The Tesla ARK Bitcoin Biotech Risk Cluster.
I've been trading since high school, and it was a really interesting way for me to fill out my decision-making frameworks and to think about thinking. And I think that the more that we have thinking about finance, the better that we're going to progress as a society. I think it's a huge gap in our educational system.
You're going to buy an option for a stock you think is going to go up. It's a call. So think of it like this. I made the options video where I was like, options are just like shopping. Rumor has it that this pallet's about to go up in price. So if I come in tomorrow, can I still buy it at said price? And a ton of women just like attacked that video and were like, you explain things so much better than my boyfriend or my professor, or like I could sit and listen to you all day. And I was like, this is what I was looking for.
But TikTok's algorithm does not reward calm and measured videos about responsible investing. It rewards this.
Watch this video for 30 seconds and you'll be rich for the rest of your life.
I try not to say the A word, the ALGO word, because TikTok listens to us.
The algorithm does impact how you feel. You know, you do notice which videos do better versus which videos do worse.
How do you catch someone's attention in less than 60 seconds? And how do you make it something that they're like, I need this in my life? Nearly impossible to do that in 60 seconds. But the people who perfect it are the people that you're gonna watch and gonna stick around.
And where people are sticking around? Reddit. And its nearly countless subreddits about finance. And by far the biggest one of those is Wall Street Bets.
There's a lot of social media platforms out there, but Reddit is like the social media platform for finance. Places like Wall Street Bets is where it all goes down.
Started in January 2012, it wasn't long before Wall Street Bets adopted a 4chan-like etiquette, leading to their tagline, like 4chan found a Bloomberg terminal.
We had all these unexplained stock moves, and we would be grasping for why stock XYZ jumped 20% in a day. And you would look at Wall Street Bets, and you would see people there talking about buying options in that stock, and it sort of, squared the circle, so to speak, and started making sense. And it was at that point that it was like, wow, we have to start paying attention to this.
Some people on the platform really spend tons of time, and others are just looking for entertainment and to have a little bit of fun, effectively gambling or looking for an outlet, trying to make a little bit of money.
Then on top of all of that, there were stimulus checks. Now clearly this money is going to people who need to use that to eat, to live, but there's a lot of people who use this money to invest in the stock market.
And it's not just stock tips. People quote unquote YOLO their entire life savings or stimulus checks on a single stock. They post what is called gain and loss porn, screen grabbing staggering hits and misses on stocks for the entire community to see.
I am about to lose everything.
And while some of the people on Wall Street Bets are novice investors, the community contains multitudes.
In one respect, what it did show us among these network groups is they are very sophisticated. They're not a bunch of ignorant people talking to other ignorant people.
And this is where the pieces of the puzzle all come together to wreak havoc on Wall Street for a solid week in early 2021.
It's pretty clear that the combination of more people having retail brokerage accounts and trading apps and more people being stuck at home looking for some kind of entertainment and some kind of community online came together in this very singular way.
What came together is GameStop.
Let's go back to the beginnings of what happened with GameStop a couple of years ago. On the boards like Reddit and StockTwits, a lot of people were talking about GameStop as being attractive value.
Some of them are even, Wall Street alums who left the industry and now still have access to tools that they can use to improve their financial well-being and make very good decisions. And I think Roaring Kitty is a perfect example of that.
GameStop is one of the most compelling asymmetric opportunities in the market today. Really, I don't understand how you could disagree with that.
At the same time that this crowd was talking it up, the hedge fund institutional crowd didn't like the stock at all, and it had the largest short interest of any stock in the New York Stock Exchange going into late 2020.
Short selling is a bet that a stock price will fall, and it's a fairly simple concept. An investor borrows a stock and then sells it. The investor is betting on buying the stock back later for a lower price before returning it to the original owner, pocketing the price difference.
What a short seller would tell you is that they almost act as a policeman in financial markets, or they're at least looking for companies that aren't what they say they are. And that can range anywhere from an outright fraud that some short sellers try to expose to just a company that's not worth as much as investors think it is.
The problem is, if the stock price
Så
rises,
teit
the short seller
at
has
du
to
trader når
pay
de prater.
to
Det
buy
er
stock
helt
back.
idioter.
And the more it rises, the more it costs. And that's what's called a short squeeze. And the hedge fund Melvin Capital was on the wrong end of that squeeze.
Melvin Capital lost over 50% of its money in the month of January alone, just from being caught in the short squeeze of the stock.
This is where the disruption comes in.
One of the most wild stories you're ever going to see. GameStop shares absolutely going nuts.
In less than a year, the company's stock has jumped from less than $3 a share to almost $350.
Cheers, everybody! Roaring Kitty has turned $50,000 or so investment into some $14 million.
Whoa! Investors all over social media use the free trading app Robinhood to wreak havoc on Wall Street.
They're actually piling on into some of these stocks to really hurt the professional short sellers.
And they all used Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, and Discord to tell one another to keep buying and, quote, hold the line and not sell GameStop.
People are getting cheerleaded for jumping in, buying at the highs. They're saying, keep going.
And it was working too, until
Thursday morning, the trading app Robinhood sent out this tweet. In light of current market volatility, we are restricting transactions, including GameStop.
People were really angry.
Robinhood was supposed to allow the regular people to play the same game these big boys are playing. But instead, we were all taken for schmucks and they screwed us.
Shares of GameStop are jumping again now that retail investors are being allowed to buy shares of the stock.
But what we learned is that when people organize online, they have the ability to disrupt the market.
And it was a big sign. The ivory walls of the institution aren't as powerful as maybe the institutions want them to be. I don't know if pumping up GameStop was the best use of billions of dollars, but I think that as a signal to society, it was pretty interesting and powerful.
the GameStop saga was so impactful that both Vlad Tenev and Roaring Kitty were called in to testify before Congress to clarify each of their roles in the saga.
One thing that's emerged from the congressional hearings is that they're interested in how retail brokerages make money and whether they're keeping the best interests of their customers in mind, but it's pretty fuzzy as far as what they would actually do as a result.
While the frenzy around GameStop eventually subsided, it didn't take long for retail investors to find other areas to invest their money.
Take a look at Bitcoin going bananas over the weekend.
Bitcoin forms
Jeg dekker shorten mine, og så logger jeg meg av. Jeg bare blir rasende, for ikke noe, alt henger seg, og det er ikke vits å trade mens Fed prater, det er bare tull. Jeg kan gå opp litt senere I dag, men jeg klarer ikke å trade når jeg ikke kan, jeg får ikke gjort noe her. Alt henger seg.
There's a chart out there showing an inverse
Se nå
correlation
liksom, se
on
nå.
meme stocks going down and cryptocurrencies going up.
There's definitely an
Ser du det?
aspect where people are making money on stocks and then moving, you know, they're agnostic, they're not hedge funds. They can invest wherever the hell they want. It's a classic.
Det er bare chartsa som henger seg.
Wherever the winners are and they're willing to jump on.
Ja, jeg trader med charts da, så det er litt viktig å få chartsene riktig.
So whether it's meme stocks like
På en
GameStop,
måte.
meme coins like Dogecoin, or entirely new ways to invest in art like NFTs, the
Ja, men
new
det her også går mot min regel. Jeg skal ikke trade når Fed prater. Jeg skal ikke trade når Fed prater, jeg skal ikke trade på close. Og nå prater Fed, da kan det gå alle veier. Det har ikke noe å si om jeg er bull eller bear, det bare går alle veier, og det er bare helt høl I huet å trade da. Og det er helt ræva at ingen av oss visste at de pratet. Det er helt katastrofe.
How people get ideas about what to invest in has become increasingly entwined with social media. And as social media companies govern more and more of our lives, the fact that now they're tied in more intimately to people's wallets.
Hvis jeg tar tapet nå, så går jeg 0. Da har jeg tjent 7000 kroner I dag, så det er fornøyd uansett.
Is technology comes in, whether it's blogs to the newspapers or online retailing to brick and mortar, they come in and they're in the same business, but they just do it in such a gigantic cost savings that it causes everybody to switch. Well, that's the risk that happens here, is that it's so much cheaper to just manage your own money. We're not there yet, but cost.
Når det ferdig? Jeg aner ikke. Det ferdig klokka, skal jeg sjekke. Jeg gidder ikke sitte her og trade med dere når ikke jeg vet hva som skjer. Jeg føler meg som totalt tullebok. Forex, fuck. For X Factory.
Hurra! Nå er det medlemskupp med 30% på strand og spekemat. Og 10-pakk med brus fra Coca-Cola til bare...
De er ferdig å prate klokka.
Det lønner seg å være medlem.
Kalender er der.
Coop. Litt inn.
Today er der. Jeg vet da faen jeg. Aner ikke noe om ferdig.
Prøv den nye kapselmaskinen Lår Barista Sublim.
Jeg har 200 leverage. Derfor trader jeg aldri når de prater.
Smaker og forførende aromaer. Lår Barista Sublim, kaffenytelse.
Jeg kan ikke bli sittende til de er ferdig å prate, ikke sant?
But like the rest of the world lately,
Aner
he's
ikke
been
hvor
working
lenge
from
jeg skal
home
prate.
a lot more than he's used to. COVID-19 has prompted a massive urban exodus as professionals of every ilk yearn for more space to live and work. As a result, rural areas have exploded, and they're poised to experience a resurgence as more and more families pack up and leave the big city to try out life in the burbs. But there's one problem with that. Not all internet speeds are created equal. Anyone who might need to upload or download large files for a living may not want to pack up and move to that cabin in the woods just yet. Now, David's house isn't a cabin, but it is in the woods, and inexplicably, his internet is workable.
My internet is okay. I pay a lot for it. It's around $140 a month.
Om jeg tappte alt? Nei. Jeg er i penger, men det er bare veldig sånn...
which is really bad for my
det er veldig
work, 'cause I
dumt.
have to upload these massive files. But I'm definitely one of the more lucky ones in this community. Just a few miles down the road, my buddy has awful internet.
Vi må være mer på ballen, altså. Hvis Fed prater, så skal vi ikke sitte og trade, liksom, for det er helt tullete.
So it's often unusable.
Some days it's around
Og min PC lagger jo som faen nå.
it'll drop down to about 0.2, 0.3.
I just want to be able to have internet at my house without having to go outside.
Jeg var pluss her nede. Jeg visste ikke at Fed prater med.
Acquiring internet. It's really
Tenk på den gevinsten av alle her nede.
We're literally a few miles away from downtown.
Og så må en fyr ringe meg og si «Hei du, Fed prater, det kommer opp». Det er helt katastrofe.
Getting high-speed internet in rural areas en masse is something our providers may simply not be ready for.
Irriterende. Sånn som jeg hater. Det har ingenting med trading å gjøre, bare totalt idioti.
If your internet service doesn't
Amatør.
have fast
Dritt.
download and upload speeds, then you don't have high-speed harmony. You have.
Americans on average pay about $70 a month for internet at home. But in rural areas, it could cost a lot more for a lot less service.
So the pricing for a fixed wireless provider here can be something between 80 and 150
Hva er det hvor lenge de skal prate, eller? Det er ingen som vet en dritt her.
megabits per second. However,
Hæ?
gigabit service, which is 1,000 megabits per second and symmetrical, is running at about 119 a month or 130 a month.
That's John Paul. He co-owns
Så lenge?
Spiral Fiber, an internet service provider here in Nevada County, California. And for the past 10 years, he's been trying to bring
Ser
an
skjermen, eller?
affordable
Ser
fiber optic
skjermen,
network
helt
to
egen
town.
åpne. Jeg får ikke
It all
gjort noe
started
med
when he applied to be part of the pilot program for Google's fiber service.
Across the country, civic boosters have been going to extremes, chanting.
Men hva gjør du med... Hvem skal du bruke den PC-en som du har, eller?
And marching, trying to get the search engine giant to look at their town.
The internet these
Ja, det andre.
days is crucial to be in the world, to be a part of the world, and to be connected to your community.
Google
Jeg må ha
ultimately
sendt
went
melding
with
til han,
Kansas City,
og
Missouri,
sagt det som du
which
sa.
left Paul on a
At da må
mission
vi gjøre
to
det
get
fort,
funding
for
to lay out fiber
det...
optic networks for
Vi
gigabit
kan ikke
service.
vente. Hva har han svart da?
Over the next several years, he would attend
Ok,
conferences,
jeg drar ikke inn dit i
pitch
morgen.
venture
Jeg sitter
capitalists,
på
and
Teams da.
apply
Jeg skal
for
ikke inn
grants
dit.
to make his vision come to life.
One of the biggest roadblocks to building infrastructure for the internet here in the United States
Perfekt.
are the
Jævlig
existing
bra.
large providers.
Takk for
They have
tipset.
their
Alt
land
for
staked
sent,
out.
riktig nok, men
They
takk skal
would
du ha.
prefer
Ha
that
det.
nobody come in and compete against them. In 2013, we applied for a grant. We went down and met with the commissioners at the California Public Utilities Commission. It was an arduous process to get funded, but we finally did against all odds. We got a $16 million grant, and then we went out to seek venture capital.
Then, in March of 2020, the pandemic hit the world.
Jeg har ikke på smart som nå, jeg har
Everybody got
fortsatt
locked down,
lagger.
and everybody came home. and everybody started using the internet. And I remember
Det er ikke
seeing
på
on one
smartzoom.
of the local fixed
Går
wireless
av seg selv.
providers' websites, they've said, hey, we know you're all staying home, but please don't use too much video, and please don't use too much bandwidth. And I thought, that doesn't work.
Men boys, nå logger jeg av. Den er så dårlig med dere at ingen av dere visste at vi skulle prate. Faen meg, ass.
Some developing
Det er ikke noe vits at du sitter og jobber. Jeg gidder ikke. Nå logger jeg av.